common security. Now, there is much in the national security strategy that was pointless and offensive and simply childlike ideological posturing. So the national security is a dog's breakfast. It's a mess of incoherence and ideological posturing.
It was as if there was an empty space, quite a large space, at the table for today's talks in Downing Street between the President of Ukraine and Ukraine's friends and supporters in Britain, France and Germany. Now, true, the Foreign Secretary, Yvette Cooper, is talking to her American opposite number in Washington later. But Donald Trump's America was not seated at that table in Downing Street, so Volodymyr Zelensky, Keir Starmer, Emmanuel Macron and Friedrich Merz just had to guess what the man who's cast himself as the peacemaker-in-chief is thinking and what he, Trump, might do next. So will Trump return to blaming Ukraine for the war more than he's been willing to blame Russia and Putin? Will he reluctantly walk away? Reluctantly, perhaps, because he'd presumably see that as a setback in his campaign to land a Nobel Peace Prize. Either way, it is getting harder to describe Trump's America as a true ally, not to Ukraine, maybe not even to Europe. And it's harder than ever after the publication of America's National Security Strategy report. The days of the United States propping up the entire world order like Atlas are over, it says. The paper pledged the USA would cultivate resistance in European states by supporting what it called patriotic parties and politicians, shorthand for populist right-wing nationalists. It was very strong stuff. It sent shivers down European spies. And earlier, I asked the former UK National Security Advisor, Lord Ricketts, what he made of it.
It certainly was an extraordinary document. No American president would have ever published anything like that beforehand. But I think it has the merits of being pretty clear. It's a wake-up call to us in Europe. You know, we can have no illusions now about where the Trump administration are. And by the way, I don't think any future American president is going to go back to the kind of automatic support for Europe that we had, for example, under Joe Biden. And it's very striking that Europe simply doesn't rate in American priorities anymore at all. It's the Western Hemisphere. Of course, it's making America strong, and it's the Indo-Pacific. And to the extent Europe seems to interest American policymakers, it's to use this as a punch bag over the kind of domestic social issues that they find annoying. And to say that if we go on with migration, we face civilizational erasure.
That was Lord Ricketts speaking to me earlier. Now, the former US State Department official, Karen von Hippel, was also pretty damning.
I suspect that if the Democrats win, they will try to revert back to normal, just like Biden did. You remember Biden said America's back, and a more traditional Republican might do the same, but that part of the party is largely disappeared.
Yes.
But the question is, will anybody trust America anymore? And I wouldn't if I were a non-American country. I would just say, okay, fine, we're happy to work with you when we can and when our interests align. But if not, this is what we're doing. And, you know, enjoy whatever it is that you're doing. I mean, I really do think it's important for the Europeans now to understand that whatever happens in any future election, America just can't be trusted in the way it could in the past.
It's Karen von Hippel. Now let me welcome to the show Greg Swenson, the chairman of Republicans Overseas UK. Hello to you, Greg.
Hello, John.
Hi.
Good to see you.
It's great to have you back. And also welcome to Daniel Freed, the former Assistant Secretary for Europe and Special Assistant to Presidents Clinton and George W. Bush. Hello, Daniel.
Good evening.
Hi to you. So, I mean, I'll get both of your thoughts on this. It does seem very clear now that Ukraine and the European allies have very good reason to fear that Donald Trump is now openly casting aside America's historic role as leader of the free world, pillar of the Western alliance. Greg, is that not fair to say?
I would say it's not fair. Yeah, it's not fair to say that. I mean, America first doesn't mean America alone, you know, and we are leading. We are definitely leading, but we cannot do it alone. And I think that the president has just really said out loud what we've known for a while, really since the Obama presidency, when Obama reduced our capability of fighting a two-front war. You know, we had that capability since World War II and kept that capability throughout the Cold War. You know, we've kind of dialed down our own capabilities, and then you talk about the economic issues as well, so and the debt. So I just don't think we're prepared to go back to that, having that capability. We can fight a one-front war, but we can't fight a two-front war. So we really need the Europeans. We need a stronger NATO. We need, you know, some responsibility in Europe to be able to defend themselves, given, you know, that there is some economic strength here.
Daniel Freed, what do you say to that?
I say that there is a better outcome at the other end of whatever it is we're going through under Trump. And that better outcome will have to involve greater European responsibility and contributions to common security. Now, there is much in the national security strategy that was pointless and offensive and simply childlike ideological posturing.
What do you have in mind when you
Underneath
say
that-
that? What do you have in mind when you say that, Daniel?
Oh, the whole business about complaining that Europe is endangering press freedoms and making no such similar point about Russia and China. What is that? Or suggesting that Russia is not a threat, but is simply a problem for the Europeans to manage. Or the suggestion that we Americans shouldn't go around pushing our own political priorities on others. Yet with Europe, we will interfere in their domestic democratic politics by supporting right-wing nationalist parties who are, by the way, much less likely to do what Trump says Europeans have to do, which is spend more on defense and take more responsibility for defending Ukraine. So the national security is a dog's breakfast. It's a mess of incoherence and ideological posturing. But your other guest has a point. Europe does need to step up, and the way out of this mess is not for Europe to act shocked and reject America, but to do more itself so that we get to the other side of this in decent shape, which will require Europe doing more, including for its own defense, and America accepting that Europe is doing more and taking Europe more seriously as an equal partner. Now, this is possible. I'm not saying it's easy because so much of the national security strategy language is intended to be offensive. So that's what I mean by childish. But there are a series of points that it makes, which can be addressed in a more constructive way. I think if Europe does that, we have a chance of getting to the other side of whatever it is we're going through in decent shape.
Okay, now, so Greg Swanson, there is Daniel Free talking about much of this document being childish and offensive. The document does talk about cultivating patriotic politicians and parties in Europe, and clearly that's a reference to parties like the AFD in Germany, the National Rally in France. These are right-wing, anti-migrant, nationalist, populist parties. And if they're to be cultivated by the United States, whatever happened, Greg, to the principle of respecting another country's internal politics, especially allies?
Yeah, I think, I guess you could believe two things. I mean, we want to respect it, but at the same time, we are dependent on our allies to be strong. So if there's a moment, and this is after really protecting Europe for 75 years, 80 years. And so, we think that if we're going to back away financially because we have to, we just can't afford it anymore, and ask the Europeans to step up, we also need them to be powerful allies. And the concern is that they won't be powerful allies if these welfare states continue to grow and we don't move back to sort of I guess you can use any of the words populist, nationalist. Yeah,
those are the appropriate words to describe parties like the AFD, and you're not disputing that, or the National Rally.
No, not at
so
all.
What does cultivating those parties mean?
Well, no, I think it's not that we want to get into internal electoral politics.
No, but the paper talks about cultivating those parties. If that's not interfering in internal politics,
but I think it's more just it's let them cultivate themselves and not push back against them. Not have Marie Le Pen arrested. Not have the AFD carved out of the coalition, which was quite a natural coalition on the right. There's several examples of it, and I think it's disappointing to see as an ally and as a friend. And we don't worry about censorship in Russia and China because that's not new. We know you can't trust anything that the Kremlin says. We know that there's censorship. That's their thing, but it shouldn't be the thing in the West. And that's what's disappointing. And by the way, I'm not like virtue signaling here. We had it in America 4 years ago. We had massive censorship colluding with the government. And that's really troublesome, and we don't want to see it happen to the Europeans.
Yeah, Daniel.
I think Greg Swanson is trying to do the right thing and take this national security strategy and pull out of it its most constructive elements and to chart a path to getting through this in decent shape with a strong European partnership.
Yeah.
And I applaud him for these efforts, but he's got some difficult material to work with. The problem the Trump administration has not resolved is that the right-wing parties it favors tend to act against American interests that the Trump administration otherwise defines. National security strategy says that Ukraine's survival as a viable state is a core interest of the United States. It's right. But then supporting that Alternative for Deutschland cuts against that because they are not supportive of Ukraine. Want Germany to do more for the common defense, spend more in NATO, do more to help defend Ukraine?
Yeah.
Can't do that and at the same time support Alternative for Deutschland, which is why the national security strategy is so internally incoherent. But Mr. Swenson is right to try to take the most constructive elements of it and chart a path forward.
Okay.
Otherwise, what? We simply fall into squabbling?
Okay.
Been there, done that, not interested.
All right, Greg, there was a very strong piece in the Times at the weekend by Matthew Syed. I don't know if you read Matthew Syed's piece, and I don't imagine you're going to agree with the argument that he presented there. But he described the foreign policy as represented by this document as it could be conceptualized, he said, as a kind of personal extortion racket. And he gave examples to support his argument. And he gave examples such as Vietnam, which was facing really crippling American sanctions until the Trump organization landed contracts for golf courses and hotels and property. And then there's the Emirates that was given licenses for advanced semiconductors, which are of great use to China and could make their way to China. But of course, we heard then of contracts for $1 billion Trump International skyscraper, and there didn't seem to be a problem with that. And I could give other examples from that article and from many, many other sources. What do you say to that? Just give me your reply.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that the president is very much an anti-war president. So I saw a great headline in the Wall Street Journal that was titled "Make Money, Not War."
Yes.
You know, if the president wants to make money, as long as he's transparent and honest about it. The last administration was making a lot of money, but they were doing it through, you know, a web of shell companies and influence peddling, China, Russia, Ukraine, Romania, Kazakhstan, all sending money to the Biden family cartel. And we didn't know about it until it was investigated years later. But, you know, so I would just rather have some transparency. It's all legal. It might not be fashionable. It might be a little unseemly for many. But I do think as long as people are making money and not fighting each other, that's really what the outcome that the president wants.
I mean, I have to put a supplementary question given that answer. It might not be seemly. People may not like the look of it all, Greg, you say, but the sight of the president and his family making billions, literally many, many billions on the back of the presidency. Now, you say it might not be seemly. Can that be in your view? Is that right? Are you comfortable with that?
No, I don't know that they're making billions. I don't know the details of all that, and I don't doubt that they're continuing to do, you know, Trump licensing deals on properties, you know, throughout the world. That's what they do. You know, so I think, and this is, you know, after he lost a lot of money, defending himself in 4 indictments, you know, 2 years ago, beginning in late 22, after he declared for the White House. So, you know, there's a lot of scar tissue there. I don't blame him for, you know, for making money and continuing operating his business. That's what they've always done. And so, you know, again, as long as it's transparent.
In a word, you say transparent, and here we are talking about it. So I guess to that extent, that is maybe a valid point, but we are talking about billions. There's endless records of that, and the money's being made on the back of his ascendancy to the presidency. And you're telling me you're perfectly comfortable with that?
Well, because for every dollar he's making, he's bringing in many, many multiples of that into the U.S. So the foreign direct investment is astronomical. And I think as long as it transfers into real wages for lower income people, which it did in 2019 and 20, you know, at the second half of his first term, his policies work. So if there's factories being built, if there's businesses that are growing and hiring people, and wages are going up just like they did in his last term. After 8 years of Obama Biden, where wages were flat, but rich people, top 10% killed it, including me. Then they had the Trump years where, the rich people were flat to up slightly, and then the working class was killing it. And then you had Biden years where, wages went down 4%. Wages went up 8% in the 4 years of Trump 1.0. Real wages for working people were up significantly. That's 8%, 2% a year, 4 times what happened in the Obama years. And then, of course, you had lower wages. And that's really tragic. That's what people care about. They don't care if Trump makes money. They care about if they make money.
All right. Well, thank you both for joining me, Greg Swenson and Daniel Fried, and giving your own take on the new American strategy.